So, I've had the experience, when I've submitted publication to a journal, even a phenomenology journal, first-person perspective. It's depending on who's reviewing your article, you get different feedback. One feedback I had once was, this is autobiographical. It's not phenomenological because the I is there. So, first-person perspectivity in terms of receptivity in phenomenological research. I think it's not quite defined as it could be. I think we have a lot of work to do when it comes to feeling our way in and the kinesthetics of experience. So I'm putting it out there to the panel to just talk about maybe where we're going methodologically and some suggestions you might have for how we might, as Scott was saying, feel our way into our inquiry, and what your recommendations are for us as writers, people who would like to get our work published, in terms of responding to such feedback or encouraging words, to really explore the kinesthetics of what it is that we're experiencing and the place for first person.
It seems to me that there's certainly no patent on the word phenomenology, so I don't want to suggest that at all. But I think there's been a lot of use of the word phenomenology and phenomenological, and there has not been a real recognition of the methodology that goes along with phenomenology in the experiential sense that it can go. So I think that there's a difference between simply describing first-person experience and really hewing to Husserlian methodology, as difficult as that may be. And I know from experience from writing the phenomenology of dance that doing a phenomenological analysis of movement amounted to spending hours and hours. You go through the process of making the familiar strange, as it's called, in terms of bracketing, and then in this particular instance, it's a matter of a static phenomenology, not a genetic phenomenology, a static phenomenology having to do, in this instance, with what is the nature of movement.
I was introduced to phenomenology. This is the personal response to the question about the first person. I was introduced to phenomenology in Australia as an undergraduate to works of Merleau-Ponty and Heidegger in a country that was not interested in that work, probably still is not much interested in that work. Not much interested in philosophizing per se. The world does most of the work for the people in that country. And yet I was drawn to that work. I was fortunate to have a professor as an undergraduate who introduced me to these wonderful writings. I didn't really understand a lot of it, but there was enough there that drew me. And it was that which attracted me to North America, to do a doctorate in North America. My first contact with this human science group was 1986. And that's where I met Andy Georgi, that's where I met Bernard Jaeger, that's where I met Steen Halling, that's where I met many of the wonderful people who've been part of this group. And phenomenology became personalized for me. I found a connection. I found what was speaking through the words. I became a bit frustrated because some of it sounded too abstract to me. Some of it seemed too distant from life, just talking around and circling through and under and over and not coming right into life itself. But there was enough in all of this, and there was enough in the words of the people to bring my own life to the fore in my academic work. So I find myself invested in the scholarship and getting off on all of that stuff. But as the classic line goes, the unexamined life is not worth living. But the unlived life is not worth examining. And so I don't see how I can keep the personal out of the academic.
We have all these ways that we continue to reproduce, and we continue to reproduce the written word. So whether it be by publication or the ways we disseminate, the written word was privileged. Merleau-Ponty was sometimes critiqued for privileging the visual. So when are we going to change, right? So the written word trumps the spoken word, and you have Heidegger, poetry, language, thought, and speaking about speech. But when are we actually going to engage in these words? And I think we've done that here.
I think what's interesting is what happens in academic culture is which journals have the most worth. So they're all out there, and there's lots of venues, but it takes time because they've been emerging in the last 5 years for them to be on par, and then so therefore the Academy will look at them, are those tier one, or what knowledge is the most worth in terms of, but they are there and they are happening.
I just have one small comment off of the line that we've been pursuing for a few minutes now, and returns to something that Maxine said, which has to do with the ability or the allowability of bringing phenomenology together with empirical work. Some of you may recall from the presentation I gave, I shared a particular phenomenological account of a mole's experience by Craig Holdrege. And what he did in kind of Uxkulian fashion was to combine insights from empirical knowledge about the sensory apparatus of the target creature, star-nosed mole in this case, with imaginative variation of one's own sensory equipment to develop a composite picture or image or idea of what that worldhood might be like. And I think that's an illustration or an example of the abstract idea that Maxine had mentioned, and it's entirely possible, and I think not unduly promiscuous to have that sort of combination.
I'm involved in empirical research, particularly with electrophysiology, on doing mixed methods research to understand what's happening when people dance, because it is such a complex occurrence. And I really think it's important, particularly in the realm of neuroscience and neuroimaging. It's a completely new form of data. A lot of it is in images. For us to engage with it phenomenologically, like what is this? And how the story of what that is told, and how it relates to our human embodied experience and behavior. So if anyone wants to say anything else about that, I would be very interested if you have any ideas about how that might develop and evolve.
Just a very brief reference in relation to your question, Rebecca, is to check out, if you're not aware of it, the work of the great Chilean biologist and phenomenologist Francisco Varela, who developed what he called first-person science, combining neurology, neurobiology, and the empirical research arising in neurobiology, with then questioning into the subjective experience of those who have also submitted to this laboratory research, and combining these to develop this, seeking a congruence between the felt subjective experience and what the scientific research was disclosing, and letting each of those correct and hone the other.
What I'd be interested to know more about the languaging of experience, because I kind of see as a field we've got a lot of interview data and plop, plop, plop and summarization. But the whole labor, I kind of think of it as a giving birth, right? And what it takes to language experience. So I'm wondering if you could maybe share some of your personal accounts, how long it takes to write in that way, what inspires you. Maybe you could take us to that place of languaging experience and to maybe reveal a little bit of that.
Everyone needs to find their own voice. I mean, I began to find when I first, long before I met David, I read your Spell of the Sensuous, which actually has turned on so many of my students to phenomenology. I use your first chapters from the Spell of the Sensuous, the ecology of magic, and the second chapter that you suggest to the reader they could skip over because it's the technical phenomenology, but it's so good. I use that to hook them, as I also use Vandenberg to hook them, and then I give them Heidegger and Husserl and
I know the
Merleau-Ponty.
same thing.
Lingus, you may or may not know this guy, Alfonso Lingus, who had taught at Penn State most of his life, and now he's retired in Maryland. He's about 85 years old, but he still is the man who travels the world at least 50% of the year. He's been everywhere on the planet, and he describes the places that he visits. And he told me the first time he ever felt compelled to really describe the culture he encountered was in Varanasi in India. And this gave birth to a book called Excesses, Eros and Culture, which was a mini course he taught at my university in 1982 that then became that book. And that began a publishing career for him of about 20, 30 books, where he doesn't do scholarship as we know it. He did that a long time ago with his books on phenomenological explanations and libido, the French existentialist theories, but then he quickly moved into death-bound subjectivities and dangerous emotions. One of my favorites is the community of those who have nothing in common. And his use of language is so rich. I finally realized that when I read The Visible and the Invisible, which he translated, I'm as much reading Lingus as Merleau-Ponty, because you read the other translations of Merleau-Ponty and nothing measures up to what he can do with it. So what I do is I find inspiration in folks like Alfonso and David, who have learned the gift of finding their voice, and then I don't try to imitate them. You might do that at first. You know, the first paper I wrote on the bonobos, I imagined, how would Alfonso do this? Where would he start it? He wouldn't start in an academic way. He'd start in the middle of a description of something, and then there'd be a double space, and then there'd be a lapse into Merleau-Ponty, and then he'd return to description. So you find your voice, but you need figures to be inspired by. Just like if you're going to learn to dance, you watch Celeste, you watch the students who are dancing at the party, and you model yourself, you learn, you stretch. So just as we move together in creative dance and are inspired by each other's movements, we read together in creative thinking and are inspired by each other's dancing words.
This formal time has now come to a close, but I'm hoping that the conversations will continue with the informal conversations, but to take these up also formally in our work and the various ways we can share. We're going to talk at the business meeting about a special issue coming from this conference dedicated to this theme in phenomenology and practice. If you're at the business meeting, we're going to talk about that, but if you're not, please check out the website, because there are a call for papers. And I think there's some really interesting topics that have come up that we've touched upon in this conversation, but I think there's a long way we can go in terms of taking these ideas. Can we please clap for our panel?